I suppose I was thinking, what would I call this talk? And I decided that it was my 10 years with Jimmy. And I suppose it started off really as a huge learning experience. And then secondly, you know, a wonderful friendship. You know, we became really good friends. And then I suppose thirdly, then there was the legacy. And then I also thought we also went through 2 Olympic Games in the whole process as well. Like Jimmy was a real avid supporter of Annalise, and I remember watching medal races, you know, on iPads, and it was you know, it was just the whole thing just evolved as it happened. And I suppose the way it all started in the beginning was that we had got a water wag called Molly, and we had been sailing her rather hard on the Shannon, and she'd been tied alongside. I have a funny feeling it was a barge. I can't remember if it was the Linquenda. And anyway, when we eventually got home, she had got a cracked knee. And so anyway, is that up?
Yeah.
Okay, so this is probably before the cracked knee as well, when we were sailing on Loch Derg in a little bit of a breeze, as you can see. I'm not sure. I think it might be Julie Delaney who took that photograph. She was standing on the pier as we were coming into the harbour. But we were, and I think there's Reggie behind us.
Sorry, Cathy, I think you're muted.
Am I? Oh, sorry. Thank you.
You're back. Okay,
did you get any of that about how much did you get?
All bar the last sentence, I think.
Oh, okay. So there's Amaryllis with Reggie in the background, trying to keep up with us, taking photographs from the rear. But anyway, when we got back to Dublin, it was the end of the season, and I showed the repair, the broken knee to Edwin Brennan, and he said, I really think you should get, you know, Jimmy, who built her, to have a look at it. So anyway, so I rang Jimmy, and actually Frank Guy gave me, I still have it written down, a really detailed description of how to get to Mount Plunkett, which was basically driving up a hill. When you got to the top of the hill and you see the Shannon, then you start going down the hill. And then when you go around the corner and you see the cattle crush, and then the forest is on your right, and then you drive into this magical land. And I suppose the first time we went was in September. And anyway, we dropped Molly off, and Jimmy said, yes, no. He was actually, he nearly took it as a personal insult that the knee was broken. And I said, it's not your fault, Jimmy. It was our fault. You know, it was our fault that it had happened. But he took it very, very to heart. And then we said we were doing our end of season event in Loch Boderg, in the Kilroy's place up in Loch Boderg in October. So we said we would collect it and we would go on up to Boderg. So sure enough, 3 weeks later, we called in and collected Molly, and anyway, off we went up to Loch Boderg. This was our, I think when I first arrived in Mount Plunkett, and I met Jimmy's, and I'm sure many of you have been there. You know, it's the most magical place, and it's sort of, you feel like you're coming into a fairy wonderland. But anyway, but anyway, after we'd been up in Boderg, I went onto YouTube and I saw, as all of you have seen, the Hounds programs, and I was so kind of taken with, this was like, Jimmy actually looked like he hadn't aged at all, even though it was like about 25 years later. And anyway, so the next thing was, I just had a bit of a mad idea. As Finn said at the time, he said, you know, most women my age go and buy a sports car, you know, and he said, and you go off and you start building boats. But But anyway, I'll read you the letter which I wrote him, and it was the project. And it says, 1, to build a Shannon One Design or a 12-footer or whatever you suggest. 2, me, Cathy, to work as your apprentice. 3, me, Cathy, to source and provide the timber. 4, I would come down to Mount Plunkett and stay in my camper van. 5, go home at weekends. 6, if you get fed up with me, go home earlier. 7, project would be at whatever time frame would suit you. Your skills and knowledge are so important that I would love to get a glimpse of what can be done. Anyway, as I said, I'm always full of wild ideas, and this is probably one of them. But I was so impressed with the HANDS program that I had to put pen to paper. I will leave you to think about it. I quite understand if you would not want to do it, but then again, you might think it would be a bit of an adventure. Again, thank you for fixing Molly. Love, Cathy. So anyway, so that's basically the next thing. About a month passed, and anyway, Annalise was at home when Jimmy rang, and he said, tell your mom, yeah, she can come and I'll teach her how to build the boat. So anyway, so Annalise rang Colin at work and said, your mad wife's off to Roscommon to build boats. So anyway, I didn't actually think he'd say yes. So suddenly now I'm in the situation where I have to do it. Like, I can't very well say no, oh, well, actually, maybe it wasn't such a great idea. How are we going to do it? So, and I didn't know, would I go down at the weekends or would I go down through the week? And then in the end, I just decided I'd just head down and see what happened. I thought after a few days, you might say this isn't working, so you just have to go away. And, but anyway, that didn't happen. We ended up, first of all, I suppose you could divide it into 3 phases. We had our sod period, our WAG build, and then we had our WAG restoration. So there were 3 kind of periods of, and like Jimmy took my apprenticeship very seriously. It was all, I had to learn everything properly. And it was only really when I started working with Doug that I realized that things happen an awful lot faster. I didn't realize that with Jimmy, it could take a month to do something, but you would actually know how to do it really well at the end of it. I think even Doug might say he's learned a few things from me, because there were a lot of things that Jimmy did that were intuitive to him, and because I had to do them about 100 times, I kind of learned how to do it. But anyway, the start of it was actually buying the timber, and Doug was getting timber in as well, so we teamed up together, and it was all delivered to Belmont, where Doug used to work. And basically when this arrived, I kind of thought, it's kind of like making a cake. They're the ingredients on how to make a Shannon. And I found actually the bill for the timber from Stones. It came, I've got it here actually. Hang on, I think it was, oh yeah, the amount, oops, sorry, jumped screen there. The total invoice amount was £2,442.35. So, and that was 10 years ago. So the timber's gone up hugely. And, like, it was expensive then. That wasn't even the oak, which we needed for making the keel and the ribs and everything. So this is now the Shannon. Again, it took quite a while, like, because there was a lot of tea drinking went on during this build as well, because there'd always be, like Jimmy said, well, also a lot of visitors as well, because I seem to be an attraction to Mount Plunkett. And as soon as I was there, like, everybody used to arrive for a cup of tea. And like some days you'd have 5 people coming in, and Jimmy would never, ever say, there was only twice, I think, in the whole time I was there, where he told me to tell the people that we had visitors. And then he told me, he never said he didn't like anybody, but if he didn't want to talk to them, he'd say, just tell them that we have visitors. And I said, but we don't have visitors. He said, well, okay, well, maybe we do. You're the visitor. So that was anyway how we dealt with it. But there was a lot of tea drinking and a lot of thinking and chatting, and I think my fondest memory of him was when I was learning how to rivet, and he used to say, when you'd hold the dolly against the nail and you'd be riveting, if it sounded hollow, you know, you didn't have the dolly held tight against the nail. And I'd be frantically thinking, I couldn't tell the difference between the hollow and the not so hollow. And he'd be going off to the cottage and I'd be frantically trying to rivet. And from the cottage, he'd say, hello! I said there was nothing wrong with his hearing then anyway. But anyway, I got the hang of it eventually. Oh yeah, I want to talk about the ribs. Yeah, that was another thing I found in my diary. The day that the ribs went in to the 178, William Prentice kindly came to help, and I suppose I had just got a GoPro at that stage, and I didn't know how. I thought I had put it on as a video, but in fact I put it on a time lapse. So I ended up with 1,400 photographs, but it actually was much better than a video, because I'll show you here. This was a time lapse. I just did a section of it. Hang on. No. Sorry, it's not going to. Oh,
yeah, that's.
Are they moving now?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So this is Jimmy coming in with the rib, and we set up as two teams. It was William and Con on one side, and me and Jimmy on the other. And then you can see it kind of got a bit competitive as we were going along, with the lads on the other side trying to be faster than us. And oh, that's it. Anyway, I mean, there's millions of photographs, but I suppose I'll read you, this was the diary from the Saturday, and it said, Saturday, 25th of June, 2011. Arrived down to Jimmy's on Saturday evening to find him in his workshop, sitting on the workbench, swinging his legs. All the 640 copper nails had to be driven into the planking in preparation for the ribs on Sunday. Con and I duly went to work and then headed off for supper in bed. The ribs have been steeping in the lake since Friday. I had to go down and carry them up to the steam box. It was amazing how the tannin in the yolk had reacted with the lake water to make the ribs nearly purple in colour in some places. The yolk ribs have been quite a saga. Saturday, 26th of June. William was due to arrive about 10, and so we got up for 9 and had started lighting the fire to boil the water for the steam box. Very quickly, we realised we should have lit the fire at 7 a.m. We did everything wrong. Put cold water in the tank, should have boiled the kettle, used timber instead of turf. Turf burns at a much steadier heat. Timber tends to flare and look great, but doesn't last. Another thing we did wrong was put too many ribs in the box, and they were not being steamed evenly. We wrapped the steam box in my sister's camel hair rug and stuffed a wool blanket into the front of the steam box, and then waited for the steam. This took 2 hours before steam was belching out of the steam box. This was when the fun started. William and Con did the port side, and Jimmy and me were on the starboard side. Jimmy would go take a rib, and we had about 60 seconds to bend the rib into place and then drive the nails through the rib. The center nail was placed to stop the rib from sliding one way or the other. We also wrapped the weights of the tea towel as they were marking the yolk when you press down on them. This is oxidization. There are 34 ribs in a Shannon, and believe me, what a day we had. We broke 3 ribs, but the rest went in really well. We finished at about 7:30 when I made dinner for us all. Jimmy was very pleased with our day's work. It was also the first time to use the GoPro camera. I ended up taking 1,400 pictures as it was on time lapse. Monday, 27th of June, Classic Boat magazine had been over in Loughree covering the downhill long distance sod race. And Alan Algio had rung to say that they would be over in Jimmy's at 10 to interview Jimmy. It was a brilliant morning. Jimmy showed them how he had every edition of Classic Boat since 1971 when he started building Shannon's. They're going to do a whole article on Jimmy in next month's Classic Boats. So a fantastic day. We anyway had to wait a day, let the timber dry out before we roofed and riveted the 640 nails. So anyway, so that just gives you, I kept a diary over, well, it was a bit erratic, my diary, over the years, but the ones that I did keep, I give you a flavour of what was going on. Now we're going back to our PowerPoint here. So basically, the great thing of I suppose the end of the first real event that we did in the Shannon was the raid on the Shannon, which we did with Alan as well, when we sailed from Enniskillen to Killaloe in a fantastic northwesterly breeze in September, and that was a real treat, I must say. So it was great to actually build a boat and then sail it. So, but then when I finished building the Shannon, I kind of said to Jimmy, well, I can't come down here and just look at you, like I'm going to have to do something, because he was saying, I'm too old to build any more boats. And I said, well, what, you just want to roll over and die, and he said, that wasn't very nice. I wasn't being very nice to him. And but anyway, I said, well, look, what's the worst that can happen? So anyway, so he agreed then we would build a WAG. And that was in fact, really building a Shannon is a lot easier than building a WAG. As Doug will tell you, he's just finished building one. We've decided that building Shannons is way easier. The WAGs, even though they're smaller, they've got 4 thwarts in them. They've got this crazy centerboard casing in them, and they're quite, and they like the shear on them into the stem is a lot. You have to steam basically the bottom 4 boards to get them to go into the stem posts. So it's a much more complex boat. And Jimmy he used to moan a lot about it as well. He used to call them the fat ladies. He said that they were like a big fat lady, rather than, he used to call his Shannons his thoroughbred racehorses, But anyway, so it took us quite a while to build the WAG, and I entered it actually into the RDS crafts competition, and I did a book to submit, because the year before I had actually submitted the Shannon, and I brought the Shannon in, but I think it was just too much information to bring a boat in. But when I brought the book in and they realized how it had been built, I got into the exhibition, and that was a real treat for Jimmy as well, that a boat that he'd made was in the RDS crafts competition. And
during the horse show,
and it was during horse show week as well. Yeah, so it was great. Well, another thing, I suppose there's just so much to talk about, of my 10 years with Jimmy, but there was one thing that he said: you always had to have a dog. So he always had a dog, and then of course I had my Labradors there, which used to be an integral part of boat building. And it was, this was Jacqueline, who was, Jeff Surratt had this WAG for a long time, and she was in quite poor condition, and we basically rebuilt her. She had to have a new keel and kelson and new centerboard casing in her. But it's so much easier to build a new boat than to restore an old boat, because when you have an old boat, you have to take everything apart, and there's just so much sort of dirt and paint and varnish, and it's a lot harder. Now we're jumping to, we had kind of two parties for Mariposa. The first one was where we had an event in Blackbrink Bay, but I didn't sail Mariposa, but this was in 2019. 18. And this was the real launch of and birthday party of Mariposa, and Jimmy, I was kind of thinking we couldn't have a party, he couldn't come to a party, so we'd bring the party to him, and we organized food, and obviously you see the pop-up tents, and there were 40 of us, and Jimmy, he'd never had that many people but basically in the cottage, I think, ever. And it was everybody, we had musicians, Irish musicians, and everybody went in to talk to Jimmy in the kitchen and came out and ate. And so that was a real treat. This is, again, and Alan and Eileen, they kindly organized all the racing for us. We had wonderful racing. And we organized a trip out to the Quaker Island, where Harman Murtagh gave a talk to all the WAGs, and we did a tour of the island.
When we were able to launch
we launched in Le Carreau, and we had some fantastic racing. And here's Harman giving us a tour of the Inchclearon, and which was a real treat for all of us as well. So we're so privileged to live in such a great country where we can do all these really fun things. So Jimmy, I think, well, you saw in the WhatsApp group, this was the Iron Age model, which he won the gold medal for in England, and I was very worried that it was such a special piece of work that it would just disappear, if when Jimmy died. And I got onto the National Museum of Ireland, and first of all, it was very difficult to, they have so many people bringing in things to them, but they told me to bring it into Kildare Street, and they'd have a look at it. And when I brought it in, it just happened that all of the curators of all of the museums were having a work day in the museum that day. And when I took it out of the box, the girl just said, "Oh my God, this is just amazing." And then all of the curators came in, and they just literally could not get over this magnificent piece of work. So it was immediately said, "Look, yes, we'd love to have it." And they decided that the best place for it would be in Castlebar in the Museum of Irish Culture. And so it was on display. It's not on permanent display, but it was on display for, I think it was 6 months, and it will probably come out back on display again. But I was delighted, as his Shannon went over to England, that at least they're somewhere where they'll be for posterity, they'll be safe. So
yeah, this is him. He's just getting it ready. There were a couple of things
broken in it, so before it was collected. So, but then I'm sure you've all I don't know if you've seen on Netflix The Dig. It's exactly the same boat, because I got onto Castlebar and I said, this is the boat that they found in The Dig. It's exactly the same one. So they were going to put a bit of a spin on it when it opens up, So that was that. So this is again. Jimmy, this was making the mast step for the WAG. We came up with we decided a lot of things that I because we weren't building boats like for speed. Jimmy suddenly was able to find best practice in there are a lot of things in boats which maybe could be done better. And one problem in the Wags and the Shannons have the same problem, is that the ribs rot underneath the mast step. So we came up with this concept that if we had a detachable mast step, which you can have in the Wag, it's not attached to the centerboard casing, but some of the old Shannons have mast steps that aren't attached to the centerboard casing. And if you can lift them out during the winter, it means that the ribs don't rot underneath. Because even however, dry you keep your boat, there's still a lot of moisture. Every year when we lift it out of the Wag, it's all sort of wet and soggy underneath it, even after a year. But this was one of the sort of things that, with between tea drinking and chatting, we came up with a few good ideas. It wasn't really changing the boat, the design of the boat, but it was just better practice, and that it would make the boats last longer and, just be better. So, this is again, Jimmy working, I learned so many things. I learned how to sharpen tools because Jimmy didn't believe in any sort of electric sharpening devices. So you had to be able to sharpen everything by hand. And actually, I think because I watched him, I think it used to annoy him that I was doing it wrong, and he'd say, "Oh, I'll do it." But so I spent so much time watching him doing it that actually now I can sharpen tools pretty well. And this is this is him. So again, this was with Jacqueline, the Wag. We were just finishing making the floorboards. Jimmy really worked up to, I suppose, he got sick sort of at the end of 2019, and this would have been just shortly before he went into hospital. So he more or less worked very much to the very end of his life. So I think it's again him. This was his favorite little hand plane. It was a Nielsen, an American plane. And I actually wrote to Neil Nielsen and I said that this was Jimmy's favorite plane. And they sent him a free, a new blade for it, because they said they make all of their tools themselves. And they said this is why they liked the idea of that, Jimmy would say, "Oh, give me," it was like if he was worried about something, he'd give me my gold plate, and then everything would be okay after that. So anyway, and this is me. And of course I had to get into the boats. Like it was always me who'd have to be climbing in and out, because he was, I suppose Jacqueline, I would have done most of the work because he just wasn't really able for it, but he kind of I kind of felt that if he wasn't needed, if he felt he wasn't needed, that he wouldn't come out. And that wasn't the purpose of the whole thing. It was to, keep him alive and going for as long as possible. So anyway, I suppose I've been talking for an awful lot. I hope I haven't bored you too much. It's
Cathy, thank you so much. The shot with Linquenda, I recall that weekend because I walked up the fields with Dad, and thankfully we were invited in for tea. We weren't told that they were visitors. So I'd like to offer the opportunity. Does anyone have any questions or comments for Cathy?
Well, I just had to say thank you very much, Cathy. It was a lovely lecture, and it was nice to revisit Jimmy again. I had such a lovely time with him. It was the little time I had with him was building the 112, and it was great. I mean, he was one of the few really great natural gentlemen.
Yes, well, he was very fond of you. Well, I think it's thanks to you that he actually, he always tells the story of when he brought his own boat over to Ree for the regatta. and he met you on the shore, and he was looking for somebody to sail the boat for him for the regatta because he couldn't sail. And I think you were to sail with Bunny Goodbody, and I think and then Reggie's mum, and then she decided she didn't want to sail, so he thirded for you, but he had the dog, and he said he remembers I don't know, the Commodore at the time telling him to leave his jacket on the ground and the dog would stay on it, and Jimmy went off sailing with you guys, and but anyway, you won the championship, and he said like that was kind of what kicked off his career in making Shannon's. And he said, you know, just as easily you could have arrived on the shore and asked somebody else, could you sail my Shannon? You might have kablasted. And the whole Jimmy story might have been completely different. So I think, Peter, it's all your fault that we're here now, you know, really, like it was luck and providence that happened, you know. So
yes, actually,
so thank you.
I'd had a really disastrous lockdown regatta in the '78, and
Okay.
I wasn't going to go up to Lochwee, and so because we'd done so badly. And I was talking to Jimmy on the foreshore in Lockdag regatta at the end of Lockdag,
Yeah.
and I said, and he was sort of saying, oh well, you know, he didn't know what would happen up in Lochwee, and I said, well, look, I'll big up my sail because I had a new sail made by Philip Watson, who was working for Taskers at the time. So, and the sail was good. So I brought up the sail, left the boat behind in Lochdag, and we got into the 108 and just went woof.
Yeah, I know.
If you know, if the 78 was meant to be a Shannon, it must have been a sort of a pair of cloghoppers, because it went like it felt like going from running in cloghoppers to running in a set of Nikes.
Well, anyway, so, well, thank you. As I said, that's thanks to you that he said that all the time, that's what kicked off his career, you know, because the boat just was a flyer, you know.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Yes, because at the end of that regatta, I asked him, would he build me a Shannon? And he said yes. And I said, well, look, he had very heavy floorboards in the 108. And I said, look, wherever you can lose weight, lose it. You know, look at their floorboards, for instance. So, and so we agreed that I'd leave him to it, and he'd send me a postcard when he was ready.
Mm.
So he did that. Eventually, he sent me a postcard. And Bernard and I said, you don't bother with masts and spars, and I've even got spare centre plates and all that sort of stuff. And don't paint it or anything. I'll do all that. So we just had the basic Shannon already. So Bernard and I went up to collect it, and we got Bernard got at one end of the boat, and I got to the other. And he said, "Oh God, are we sure we can do this?" I said, "Look, just give it a shot." And the two of us lifted it up and put it on the sand as if it was a sort of a 12-foot dinghy.
He went back to doing heavy floorboards when he built my Shannon. Because then when I looked at the 108's floorboards, when she went off down to Burke Corbett, they were like wafer thin, and I was just there like, what's this a wafer thin floorboards when you're making me have the big heavy ones? So
Yeah.
No, it is.
You say it again, because I can hear you.
Can you hear me? Floorboards, I say, are very important things. We were chasing Peter Wilson and Owen Delaney for a long time before we passed them. But when we did pass Peter one time, he was driving at the time, and we passed him downwind. And he stood up and he threw his cap in the bottom of the boat, and he smashed the floorboard with his foot. He came up, he lifted his foot up, and the floorboard was wrapped around it. But they're very important things.
He said they were very important.
Yes, sailing with Jimmy. I remember we were trying to get past the point to go into Hudson's Bay. I was a bit of a drifter, and I think Peter Wilson was behind us and somebody else. And I thought, oh gosh, they could well get past us here. So I stamped my foot on the floorboards. We were quite close to the shore, and I shouted out, "Rocks!" Whereupon Peter Wilson and the other guy tacked to get clear of the point, and I sailed on round the point, and away we went.
I often wondered, Hucky, how he won all the races.
You got to have a little bit of imagination.
There's a little story about Jimmy. Jimmy, I became quite friendly with Jimmy early on anyway, we started down here this business of rowing cots. There were 18-foot fishing boats, and the good guys all had thin boats and so on. So I said to Jimmy one day when I was up there, I said, would you build a cot that would beat the rest of them? And he did. He built 4 of them, and they were untouchable. They couldn't get in within hundreds of yards of these guys. They would fly. So he wasn't just good at building Shannons, he was brilliant at building any boat.
Are they still around, those boats?
Yes, they are, yeah. PJ Slattery has one down here. And I think, what's the name? That does the garden work, what's his name? Maher.
Oh, Sean Maher has one, doesn't he? Yeah.
Maher has one, yeah. Sean has one, yeah.
Yeah.
But they're lovely boats. They're beautifully built, and by God, could they go. Fantastic.
Tom Tiernan as well. He has one as well.
He has one, yeah. Tommy Tiernan of Alamo, yeah.
Yeah, I think that Francis had that. One of the last he built, I think, Teddy, was for Francis on Island Moor. But sadly, I don't think that boat is being kept together. So I think he's probably gone. But I think she was the last of those rowing boats that he did, of those racing boats,
Oh, they were beautiful. I mean, they were absolutely beautiful, untouchable on the water. Fantastic.
Were they, Teddy, rowed by 1 or 2 people?
2 people. And they used to take this very seriously here. They'd go on training. They'd be out there every evening, these guys.
Yeah.
And Jeanette here.
I used to row.
Jeanette used to row.
I used to compete, for goodness'
She used
sake.
to compete yeah. Everybody was in it. Everybody was in it. It was unbelievable, serious stuff. And they roped me into then starting them and finishing them and all the rest. I tell you, that was because if I didn't do the thing right, I got into terrible trouble with all the neighbours down here, I tell you.
That gave you plenty of muscles and well.
Yeah, but it was great, wonderful. It was a great spectacle. See them all flying along on these yokes, and they were out every evening practicing.
Yeah, that's right.
Out every evening. Doesn't matter what the weather was like, they'd be out there.
Yeah, in any weather. Yeah.
And why did it? Jimmy said I asked him why did he think it had stopped, and he said he thought it was possibly because there wasn't enough. Like, if there'd been boats in Ree as well, there'd have been more competition, like that it was only in Lough Derg, and that, maybe if there'd been, that if you could have gone, done a circuit, they would have taken off. Because I said to him, can we not get it going again? It sounds like it was so much fun, and it's, with with the boys rowing now.
I think, did someone say it was on the fellow who he said something about insurance? Was it? You were having trouble with insurance and safety?
None of us were insured in any way. Was it this?
No, there was insurance. Insurance didn't come into it. Nobody was insured.
Nobody was insured.
Yeah.
Like the good old days, nobody was bothered with insurance.
I know, it's much better, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Because life is very complicated now,
Yeah.
Oh, I know.
They used to have those races in Lough Derg Regatta, I think in the 70s. And Vivian and I borrowed a boat and we set off on the line And I don't know how many boats there were. There were about 6 or 8.
That's about
And
right.
we had a strategy well worked out. We were going to take it easy and finish with a big finish. And they set off. The wash from the guys setting off in front of us, we nearly capsized. Absolutely horrendous. And we eventually finished, and we finished second last. Very proud of it, because we beat 2 gentlemen who rode for Cambridge. Never seen such an event.
Oh,
And
I
they
tell you
were
what.
miles last.
Yeah.
Round
Yeah.
end and round, those are the big boats.
Yeah.
I
Oh,
do
yeah.
that. I see
Yeah.
those boats, Philip. I see those boats on, you know, the actual professional rowing. And I look at them and I go, that's easy peasy compared to what we used to do. The
No,
wooden,
it was, I mean,
wooden
trying to,
oars and the wooden boats. I tell you what, it was tough work.
I don't know whether it was the windward mark. I don't know what you call the mark you went round, but anyway, just to get around it was impossible.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
I used to be, we used to be.
Yeah. Yeah. And they used to get tangled, as they call themselves. They used to get tangled at the mark.
At the mark.
But if we just go back to Jimmy, I was always interested in Jimmy's local history. And there was a guy up here who he drowned sadly on the lake. And I could never find any reference to him. His name was a Dr. Locke. And I asked Jimmy about this once. Ah, yeah, he said. And he described in detail to me this gentleman, Dr. Locke, who had a fierce temper. And he used to go out when the eel fishermen came into the bay. He used to go out with his shotgun and run up and down the shore shooting at them. And I then went back and I discovered that I'd spelt Locke wrong. It was L-O-U-G-H, not L-O-C-K-E. I eventually discovered Jimmy was describing Dr. Locke and these events. In fact, I think they took place when he was about 2 or 3. And now whether he was just stories, I'm sure it was stories rather than memories, but he had this vivid description of describing this poor gentleman. And it was a lovely story because I've always wanted to know about Dr. Locke, and eventually Jimmy told me all about him. Jimmy himself was a great rower. Up in the regattas in Lanesborough, we hear very little about that, but he would never talk about it. He'd just go up, race, win, and go home again, a bit like the Black Islanders going up to Carrick-on-Shannon.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And these boats probably singing him.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. But it was a big thing. Rowing was a big thing when I was a boy in Athlone, which is not there yesterday, but when I was a boy in Athlone, the People's Regatta, there was rowing races all the time between the bridges in Athlone.
With the big boat.
With rowing boats, ordinary rowing boats. Yeah. And they had engines and Elto engines and stuff like that, Seagulls and Eltos and all the rest. They all came on the market, and that was a great new era altogether. Fantastic.
I mean, Jimmy told me one time about there was one of the Shannon cruisers had, in bad weather, had gone, over in Gailey Bay, had got into trouble over there, and he'd been out fishing. And anyway, he ended up rescuing this, towing it. And I said, well, did you have your engine? He said, oh, you had the engine, but you've no control with the engine. So I rowed, and he towed it off the rocks, And I said, I know his boat, it's a 16-foot boat, but to be able to actually move in bad weather and tow it to safety is a pretty impressive feat, But yeah, because I said, well, the engine. He said, oh no, the engine was useless. No, you needed the oars to sort this problem out, But I kind of thought, gosh, and he said he got soaked as well. That was the thing. He said, I was so cold, he said. And anyway, he got them all, and I said, well, did they not offer you a cup of tea or anything? And he said the woman who was with the cruiser, I think, had basically was trying to kill the husband or whatever, because he decided that he would make a hasty retreat.
That's really why they end up in rocks.
I don't know whether Jimmy was one of these people, but I suspect he may have been. But I know that from up around that area, that when they'd fish, they'd collect all their fish, and then they'd have to row down to the town to be there early in the morning for whatever, one day of the week or something. And this was a very long row and a very hard row with a whole load of fish. I don't know whether Jimmy ever told you about those sort of things, but there was a lot of that went on.
Well, he said, well, that was one reason why I think the boats were so fast, because whoever got to sell their eels first, got the better price. But we found, Con and I found all these, there were receipts from Billingsgate, wasn't it, Con, for the eels? Were you looking for them? And they used to either go from Kiltoom or Knockrockery.
Where's the camera on this thing? Can you see? Can anybody read that?
People need to click on speaker view.
Oh, speaker view.
Speaker.
No, we need to speak on.
So it's each person. You don't have to worry. We've got.
Keep talking, Cathy. I'll open up another way.
Yeah, but no, we found all these, and there was one terrific one, which was more or less they had arrived in London, and they were very, the letter said that the eels had arrived.
Hold on, I'm going to share.
You're going to tell that story.
We'll see if we can share screen again. We'll try this again. Share our screen.
Just while you're going looking for that, to mention, I had the good fortune of having a day's fishing with Jimmy in the month of March. But the type of fishing that's somewhat frowned upon these days. I drove down for the day, and we went out in his beautiful lake boat, which I think, Cathy, you're still looking after. The Seagull engine took us down as far as Rindoon, I think. And that's when, at that point, then we put the otter board out, and it was all rowing from there. The Seagull didn't get used until we were going home again. And we took turns on the oars, but I have to say he took the lion's share of the rowing, because I was getting blisters. And if you didn't row with the otter board fast enough, then it didn't behave itself. It didn't go out, it didn't stretch itself out a beam of you enough. So you just had to keep up the speed. But it was, I think it's one of those things that's totally illegal, that's, really a very important thing to at least experience these illegal things at least once. And it was a great
Can you see these?
Privilege for me, I must say.
David, can you see these on the screen?
Yep. Yeah.
1949. So Jimmy, they used to bring them down to the local railway station in a box and send them to London on the train from Knockrockery. Either
Knockrockery or Kiltoom.
Yeah, and of course when they arrived in Billingsgate, this is the receipt from salmons and wholesale fish and eel merchants, Billingsgate. And here's one: eels arrived in bad and seized on arrival by the convoys as per the attached note. And here's the note, and basically saying, first of all, they go on about how they were set up by His late Majesty King James I, which is he was the fellow who took over from Queen Elizabeth I in about 1603 or something. And then it said they were found on view survey to be unwholesome, corrupt, and unfit to be sold. 1 case of eels, 1 case of eels. So Jimmy, there's another one. This is August. One arrived very badly. Ice well, warm weather. Can you see that? So I asked Jimmy, did you use ice? He said, well, where the hell would we get ice in Roscommon in 1940? Here's another one. So the price varied on there's one, 7 arrived Sunday, 7 shillings. James Hanley was one of the Hanleys, Jimmy said, who had he had moved to Carrow from the Black Islands. He married someone in Carrow, and that's and he was looking for, as he said, he was looking for a young fellow to help him, and so that's how Jimmy got into the fishing. Was with just look at this market glutted with eels, and then they start sending them. This is 1950 to Birmingham. In bad condition. You pack too many in the box, they sweat and stink during the warm weather. So that's we found those in the cottage. Those were that was a different time, huh? Teddy, were you involved in the eel fishing?
No, the only involvement I had with eel fishing was I forget the name of the families that used to live up in Loughrea. But anyway, they used to come down with their eel boxes. They towed their eel boxes down under the railway bridge, and we were living beside Sid in the Miranda, beside in the Watergate pier. And the boys would come down with their boxes during the week and be there underwater, the eels still in them and alive, of course. And then they would come down very early, 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning with their truck and go out and get the eel boxes. And the only way out there was my rowing boat, which was beside us at the Watergate. And we got a bit annoyed about this thing. So Pauline approached them, the boys, one morning, very early, and said, "Oh, where should we look after you? We look after you." What did they do? They gave us a couple of blooming big eels. Keep us quiet. That's a fact.
Question: how did they catch the eels?
Worm and long.
And
Were their lines strapped with worms on it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it'd be,
I used to catch them as a boy in Rinskaheen in the harbour and catch them, and I used to have to fight because they used to dive under the rocks, and we used to have a tug of war. And when they came out, I would run with this wriggling and nail it to the work table, cut off its head, and then I would take the wriggling body, because it didn't die, and throw it in the pan and give it to Edgar, my grandfather, who absolutely loved them.
Jimmy brought down his eel lines for one of the Loch Derg regattas at our request, and we set them one night roughly outside Shannon Sailing, more or less outside Peter Wilson's place there, fairly shallow water. There was, I think, as I recall, there was about 50 hooks. He'd brought a full bucket of worms with him as well, wherever he dug them from, and every hook was set on the full length of it, and then there was stones at each end and a little marker, but otherwise you didn't know it was there. It all lay along the bottom, and then we went out the next morning then and lifted it, and my recollection, but I'd have it written down somewhere, was that we had about 27 eels, and he just kept the best of the silver eels, which were the ones that were migrating. He maybe kept about 6 or 8 of them. All the rest were just cut away. They were just cut away, hook and all. No, because the hook was down in the eel. He put them into a sack then, which was a very, very fine mesh sack. Tied it in multiple times, because if there was even the tiniest hole, they'd find their way out. And then that was dumped for a day or two into the water at the back of the, inside the. At Goose Island, the sort of water that's just behind where the boats used to moor, and left there so that they could, if you like, pass everything through over the course of a couple of days. And then on one of the evenings then, we then cooked them and made an almighty stink, but they were absolutely gorgeous. We actually grilled them. Yes, we grilled them and ate them with butter and onions, and that was it. But that was a real treat. And in a way that was illegal as well, because as I understand it, Jimmy was one of the many eel fishermen that was bought out by the ESB, so he probably shouldn't be doing it anymore. So another great little privilege to have been involved in.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah, about 20 years ago, in the yacht club, regularly a lorry would come down early in the morning, and I can't remember what they were pumping them out of, but they were pumping eels into this lorry, and it was off to get to the ferry in Rosslare to go to France. And they told me the money, they were making huge money from the eels. I don't know whether it was legal or not, but anyway, they were making huge money from them.
Jellied eel's a delicacy in London.
Yeah.
Reggie, Reggie, I think you're on mute. Well, you're not on mute actually, but we can't. I can't hear you anyway. Can anyone else hear Reggie?
No.
Reggie, feel free.
Tell me, Cathy, going back to Jimmy Furey, I always used to be amazed at how big his hands were.
Yeah.
Yeah, and yet it's astonishing to me that he was such a wonderful craftsman, especially with model building and the like. I mean, am I right? And
oh yeah, like his hands were like I have quite big hands, and his were twice the size of mine.
I just have, and in some of those photographs, you could see his hands as well. But I didn't, you know, you kind of think that big hands would be an inhibition for the precision work and that he had to do, but it's clearly not.
Oh no, like he had the most amazing, and he liked things to be, as he used to call it. I love the expression. He said they were tasty. You know, like to me, tasty is like, but for him, tasty was that it had real class and that it was very, you know, beautiful. And he could do the most, and the other thing as well, because he'd had his eyes lasered when he was about 80, he had perfect vision as well. Like I'd be hunting around looking for my glasses and he'd be there like, I'll give it to me, I can do that. You know, like he had perfect vision but he had worn glasses all his life, you know, so he sort of ended up the other way around. You know, we were all wearing glasses, but he actually had ditched them in his later years. And between that, he was able to do, even though he had a lot of art, like his fingers used to have to kind of open them up. They were quite arthritic, but it didn't seem to, actually, we have this model boat of a whaling boat, which Con bought for me on our honeymoon when we went to, it's a long story, but we went to the Azores with a friend of ours, with Malcolm McNaughton on his boat, and we paid huge money for this whale boat.
No, but a boat made
out of whale bone. And anyway, a few years ago, I decided I needed a bit of a clean. Anyway, I haven't told God this, but anyway, I'd washed it and I'd left it on the balcony at home. And at the time we had a puppy. And anyway, the puppy basically ate the front of the boat. I nearly got sick.
Yeah, I definitely haven't heard of
I'm only not while I'm in company, you know, safer to do this in company. So I brought the boat down and I said, Con's going to kill me. I said, like, we paid, like I can't remember, we paid an awful lot of money for this thing.
Stupid money. Yeah.
Like crazy money for this bloody boat. But anyway, and this is like, this would have been about 4 years ago. And I said, Jimmy, I don't know, you're just going to have to do it, like, because like Con will murder me, like no question about it. So anyway, sure enough, and it was chewed at both ends. Like luckily she left the kind of middle. But anyway, Jimmy did this most incredible job. Like you wouldn't even know it was better than it had been actually. But if you saw it, it was about that long. It was about a foot long. It's here.
I must go and look at it now. Excuse me.
I'll get it. You don't know where it is. I know where it is. Here.
That puts a different interpretation on the phrase "bow wow."
Reggie, you're back. I'm not sure if we've sound. No, we don't. I don't think so. I can't hear Reggie anyway.
No, I can't hear him.
And unmute yourself again, Reggie. Yeah, you're unmuted. No, I don't know. Okay. Does anyone else have any comments, questions, or indeed stories or memories?
Well, I'd like to just say something, but Cathy isn't there now. But is she within hearing, Con?
Yeah, she can hear you all right, yeah.
Because I just think, look, I know that I would have said this to you before, and many people have said it to you, but, you know, I think that Cathy and yourself, Con, and all the rest of your family added many, many years to Jimmy's lifespan and many, you know, hours and hours of happiness. And I think that's an enormous gift that you both gave to Jimmy in his lifetime. So I just, you know, well done.
Thanks very much.
Yeah.
Thank you. It was a real privilege to, and it was you who introduced him to us actually, and it was a real privilege to be able to go down. Yeah, and he became part of Cathy's life for the last 10 years. So yeah, it was fantastic.
Thanks, Frank. Does anyone else want to jump in?
I was just going to say, somebody said it earlier on that he was one of the world's great gentlemen. He was gentleman, absolutely. There wasn't a bad bone in his body. Honestly, he was a lovely, lovely man. And his hands, by the way, his fingers were the size of my thumb. That's a fact. That's a fact. I looked at them so many times, and he would do this small little intricate work. He came to me with a problem one time, and he wanted to make an anchor for a model he had made. He was going over to England to some exhibition, and he had tried to get this. It was a flop-through anchor, and he tried to get this, and it was only this size, tiny anchor, tiny little thing. And he can't, and he said, I can't get this. The solder keeps on messing up, and it's a terrible looking thing. So I took it away anyway. I took the idea away, and I made a new one. And I sent a electric current through it to melt the solder in the joint, not all over the piece. Well, he thought this was Christmas coming together. It was wonderful. It was wonderful. Because then he could send his model away. It was perfect. One of my little things with Jimmy.
Thanks, Teddy. And I see Cathy is back. Just one thing to note for housekeeping: if anyone has the grid view, if you're on a laptop or a desktop, you can press in the top corner. There's a speaker view, so you'll be able to see Cathy when she's speaking on the full screen, just so you can see the model. Cathy, over to you.
Yeah, okay, here is, oops.
This is the Azores.
Azores where you can see a little bit, but basically you can see the front there got eaten. The back got eaten, but he fixed it.
He did a great job.
He did a great job.
Where did you get the whalebone to fix it?
No, he chopped up. I know I had to go to the butchers and buy bones and stuff. But anyway, I hadn't told Con because I was so terrified he would kill me.
Cathy.
Yeah?
Cathy.
Yes?
Is there anything else you'd like to tell us about while you have witnesses?
But I think Jimmy found it hilarious. You know, I think that I'd be so terrified of Con. But anyway.
We're just looking for a photograph of him. It's a brief portrait shot of him.
It's under, it's Blackpool Bay, I think.
Just while you're doing that, can I just put in a plug or a mention of Paddy, who was Jimmy's brother? Because I know he had died by the time Cathy went down to Jimmy, but they were very much a team in the early days, and it was Paddy who really helped Jimmy build the boats, put in the ribs, and it was Paddy who looked after the garden, and he had an absolutely immaculate garden behind the house, whereas Jimmy did the boat building and Paddy did the gardening at the back, and he was in the Navy. But I just think we should just remember Paddy because they were for many years a twosome, and they worked together building the Shannons.
Philip, I remember Paddy very well, I must say, and he had some great stories from all over the world from his merchant sea days. But he also did most of the cooking, as I recall.
Yes.
So he, as you say, he did the kitchen garden. Jimmy did the cattle and the sheep, I think, and the boat building. And Paddy then did all the housework and the kitchen, and as you say, an amazing cottage garden, if you like. Yeah.
It was a very sad chapter when some local thugs attacked the place, and Paddy came out worse of it. But and they robbed some, they got some money. But Jimmy, not to be outdone, went out the next day and bought a new car to show them they hadn't got everything. The sort of character he was.
Any final comment? Cathy was looking for a picture, but otherwise.
Don't worry. No, it's okay.
Nope, you're okay.
No, we're okay. I will.
I'm conscious of time.
Yeah.
So unless we have any other final comments or questions or stories, we'll leave it there. What I will say is that next week we have Reggie. Same day, same time, and I'll forward on the usual Zoom links as well. But Cathy, thank you very much. That was absolutely brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Cass.
Well done, Cathy.
Thank you.
Thank you, Naomi, for organising it.
Excellent stuff.
And Erica.
To Jimmy.
Yeah, to Jimmy.
God bless you all.
Bye,
God bless
Maura.
you all.
Yes.
Well done.
Bye, everyone.